just as you guys are hopping into this video, this is only my second video, so I'm still learning. I'm not great at editing yet, and I'm just trying to kind of figure out how I can get all this information to you. It's so much information, it's really hard for me to just kind of spew it off since I'm still learning it too. Any constructive criticisms or comments or questions, just leave them in the comments below and I will get to you guys. So bear with me as I'm learning. Thank you for watching, and I hope you get some good information out of this. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Sorry for the delay in the video. I was really sick, and I wasn't really able to film. My voice was just really bad. My throat was really hurting, so I decided to push it off a little bit, but I'm getting it out to you as soon as I can. So welcome to the first installment of my PC series build. So we're going to start off today with RAM, otherwise known as random access memory, or oftentimes just called memory or main system memory. It's important to distinguish that it is called memory often because if you're looking through parts on parts lists, it's important to designate between memory and storage. I know when I originally started building, I didn't know the difference, and I didn't know there was a difference or different namings, and I was talking to people about it and it was confusing people. Ultimately it turned out fine because I figured that out, but it is important to understand that there is a difference. So for those that are kind of new to the computer building world, RAM is one of those things that it just has so much stuff that it's kind of hard to understand. As an example, if you were coming across, a parts list and you came across, let's say this right here. So G.Skill Trident Z RGB series 16 gigabyte in parentheses 2x8 gigabytes, 288 pin DDR4 SDRAAM, DDR4 3200, PC4 25,600, desktop memory module F4 3200 C16D 16 GTZR. That is something you could actually come across when you're looking through your, parts on PC Part Picker or whatever it is. And that could be the title of your thing. And it can be really confusing to understand what all those things are and how that actually affects you as a buyer. So we're going to be trying today to kind of use this video to help us understand what these kinds of things mean. And so we're going to look at kind of the form factor and the slots and that type of thing, the type or generation of the RAM itself, capacity, the speed, and the latency, typically known as timing. And since its creation, it's been commonly dubbed with two different names. These are going to be what you're going to see on a lot of your typical pieces or your sticks of RAM. It's going to be printed on the tags. That's just how they name it. One was developed by Intel and the other is kind of a commonplace standard between all manufacturers. And this is going to be the DDR and PC. So DDR stands for dual data rate, and PC is disputed on its correct meaning, but most people just contribute it to mean personal computer, and Intel was just trying to get a new standard going, and it never really grabbed on as much as they would have liked. In the generation of RAM known as DDR4 or PC4, most people are going to call it DDR4, and you're going to see it written out. on just about every website that you're going to buy it from as DDR4. It took over for DDR3 in 2007. You may still actually see DDR3 in computers, usually either lower end computers or computers that were built in, before 2007 or thereafter, just a little bit. So it is good to familiarize yourself with it a little bit, but for the most part, in today's day and age, you're going to be using DDR4. But it is good to also note that DDR5, the next generation of your RAM, is suspected to come out in its first iteration in 2020. Whether or not that's actually going to happen, you never know. It's just rumored, but it's a good thing to look out for. It might be the next step in really bringing computers to the next level. I'll go into a little more detail about the DDR and PC and their numbering systems and what those mean to you. But I would like to also tell you that we're going to be getting into the names of the slots. So, and then the last thing I'm going to touch on in the video is just a hair of what timing means, what a few of the numbers mean, and what you really want to look for. It is a huge subject. I have all the research I did, and it's going to be linked in the description below if you want to look into it more. If you want me to make my own dedicated video to just timing and really describing what it is, I can do that as well. So we'll just kind of gloss over a few of the things about timing and what it's going to really look like for you and what you want to look for when you're actually buying your RAM. So for the numbering system in DDR, that's what I want to get into next. We're looking at, so it's going to be DDR and then a number, and that number is going to designate the generation that the RAM is from. We're currently in 4, so most are going to be DDR4, and then it's going to be a hyphen, and typically it's going to be 4 numbers afterwards, and these 4 numbers represent the rate at which it operates in megahertz. Just a small tidbit, it's not the clock speed. The actual clock speed is going to be half of the number, and it's able to utilize both sides of the clock, and therefore that's why it's called double data rate, and therefore it doubles that number, and that gives you your megahertz that is listed on the DDR title. It's a similar system for the PC name nomenclature. It's still going to be PC number, which is the generation that it's in, and then typically about 5 numbers are following it. And this is going to be the peak data transfer in megabytes per second. And you're actually able to get that number by multiplying the 4 numbers after the DDR by 8, and that gives you about what the PC is coming out to. So a few things to focus on for the DDR and the numbers and the jargon is that it's important. I'd say the most important thing to look at is going to be your generation. The form factor of the actual RAM module has changed from generation to generation, and therefore you cannot use, let's say, a DDR4 stick and a motherboard that has a slot for DDR3. It will not work, and it could be a very expensive or sad mistake if you were to make that. So it's so important that that is something you are making sure that your RAM and your motherboard are compatible. With the rise of AMD Ryzen, the speed is actually almost linked to the CPU itself, and the faster the RAM is, the better off the CPU is actually in running. They currently have a recommendation of about 3600 speed for your RAM, and so it's important when you're looking at what type of CPU you're using. You might want to really bump up what speed your RAM runs at. Typically with Intel, you're going to get negligible effects running similarly speed, like a similar speed RAM stick. So if you're going from 32 to 3600, it's really not going to have too much of an effect on Intel, whereas in AMD, it could actually have quite a significant effect. Something to also look at with this is when buying your motherboard, check what the limit of the speed it allows the RAM to have. So most motherboards only support up to a certain speed. So let's say your motherboard supports DDR4 3600 speed, and you go out and you buy your DDR4 4000 speed kit. It will not clock to 4000. You're going to waste that money on that extra 400 megahertz, and it's going to be just kind of a lost cause. So really, either make sure your motherboard is matching the RAM you want, or your RAM is going to match the motherboard you want. So a little bit onto the slots of RAM. If you're watching more than just typical desktop PC builds, it's possible you're watching just tech reviews and things like that, and you might hear more of these other ones. So the slots in the name are DIMM and SODIMM. So these stand for dual inline memory module and small outline dual inline memory module. So really the only thing that's going to matter here is that DIMM slots are in almost every single major desktop PC, and SODIMM slots are in almost every single laptop, and maybe a few small form factor builds if they're really specialized. If for some reason you are working on really old hardware, something like well before the 2000s, you could come across the SIMM slot, which is just single inline memory module. But I mean, ultimately, you're going to be probably using the RAM that was in it to start with, because that's going to be extremely difficult to find now that it's almost 20 years later. So I doubt you'll probably come across a SIMM slot ever. So now it is time to touch on the huge topic of timing. Every set of RAM is going to have numbers called their timing. There's typically 4 numbers in the set, and it's something like 8-8-8-24. So the first number is going to represent your CAS latency. Number is TRCD. Your third number is going to be TRP, and your fourth number is TRAS. Essentially, all 4 of these are just numbers that have to do with the amount of time your RAM takes to do a certain function. So latency is the number of clock cycles that it takes between asking the RAM for data and beginning to receive the data. So this is actually in clock cycles and not time, and so you're going to see it as like 8 clock cycles. That's going to be your latency, and then that's where the speed of the RAM comes in. So if you have 8 latency and 2600 speed, you're gonna be able to find out how long it actually would take for that data to be retrieved. So as time has gone on, with RAM being developed differently, typically it has actually had a larger, um, the number in the timings have actually grown typically. We were originally in like your DDR3s, you might have latencies of 10, and now it's typical to have 14 to 24 in your latencies. It's just that the speeds of the RAM itself has made up for that latency change and actually overall has become faster. I don't know if it's possible to get back to those latency speed, like latency numbers that were lower in the future, and possibly with the higher speeds really crank out crazy RAM speeds, but that's not something I know, and maybe some computer engineers out there would know. But for the common folk, what's really going to be important here is having a small understanding of what latency is, but really is going to be looking at the overall number in your timing. So you're going to look at your first few numbers. You might be at 17, 15, 17, I don't know, 32 or something like that. And it's going to be, what you're really going to be looking at is, or perform better than the kits that have higher numbered timings. There's so much that goes into timing, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to kind of stop there, and we're just going to kind of call that a day. And if you want more information, I have all this, the timing research that I did, links below. And also, if you really want me to, I can do more research and get a better, more clear explanation and just make a dedicated video to just timings. The last main point I want to make is using larger sized RAM. So something like 8 gigabyte kits versus 16 gigabyte kits or 32 gigabyte kits. This ultimately is going to be the number one thing that is going to make a difference in your computer. If you didn't look at your timings at all, and all you did was look at speeds that are in a relatively medium range, somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000, you could pick any one, and you were choosing between 8 gigabytes, 16 gigabytes, or 32 gigabytes, that is going to be what is going to change your computer the most. So ultimately, if all you take out of this video is the sizes, get as much size as you can get, the fastest you can get, and that's really what's going to matter. Don't think that 200 extra megahertz is more worth than the extra 16 gigabytes that you might have if you are spending, 20 extra dollars. Go with the larger sized RAM. Something I wanted to point out really quick is, if you're upgrading your old computer with new RAM, you really want to look at your speeds. So, let's say you already had 16 gigabytes of 3200 speed in your computer, and you think, oh, sweet, I'm just going to grab this extra 16 gigs off, whatever, Newegg, and it's 4,000 speed. This will be great. It's going to be a huge upgrade. In a sense, yes, you're getting an extra 16 gigabytes, but your 4,000 speed is actually going to be clocked down to whatever the original sticks were at. 9.9 times out of 10, it's going to be clocked down to the original RAM. So don't waste your money on that extra oomph in the RAM if you're not planning on changing out everything or making sure that your computer is able to differentiate between them, but most are not. When buying your RAM, looking at the overall use case of what you're going to be doing is really important. It's not incredibly important to have 32 or 64 gigabytes of RAM if you're just going to be a entry level gamer or a light workload, even a medium workload. Honestly, you probably aren't going to need like 64 gigabytes of RAM. It's going to be overkill. It's not going to be used up. So the best kind of sweet spot is going to be 16 gigabytes. It's probably going to get you more than what you need for gaming, and if you have some small workloads, that it's going to be plenty. If you're doing something like content creation or editing large files and things like that, it's possible that 32 to 64 is going to be a better route for you, but for almost everyone, 16 gigabytes is probably going to be enough. In modern day computers, we have dual channel and quad channel memory. So this is going to be in reference to the slots that are in your motherboard. They can actually be, you can put your RAM in a way that allows it to link those two together and almost bounce information back between them, and therefore making it a more effective kit. So let's say you have two kits online that you're looking at. One is a 2x4 gigabyte sticks, and one is a 1x8 gigabyte sticks. Having the two 4 gigabyte sticks in dual channel will actually net you a better result than the one 8 gigabyte stick by itself, just because it's able to use that dual channel ability, and it can almost bounce information back and forth, and it speeds it up. Well, speeds up the overall processing times. Here at the end of the video, I just want to say thank you for watching. This week I will be putting out another video. I'm going to be doing an episode on either GPUs or CPUs, one of the two, or both. I might get them both out this week, but and then I'm going to start compiling a list of the components I will be adding. I'm really in need of some this computer to get built, so I'm going to try to get these videos out quick.